welcome back to my channel. It's nice to see you here. If you are new, my name is Jen. I make content about being neurodivergent, having chronic illnesses, managing the two, academia, writing. To be honest, I just make content about whatever's happening in my life, and at the moment it's been a lot of health stuff, but you're more than welcome to join us here. Yeah, this video is honestly going to be a little bit strange because I'm potentially making this video for myself so that I can look back on this, and I don't want to make this video, which is just being honest. I don't really want to, but I'm trying to log, I suppose, my successes, small progress I make in terms of managing my health, all of those kind of things, because I feel at the moment like I'm quite overwhelmed with trying to manage all of the different areas of my life. And that includes my health, being neurodivergent, my job, my academic goals, writing. I feel like everything feels like it's a lot, and I feel like I'm quite easily overwhelmed by very small things at the moment. So I've noticed I'm taking a lot less notice of like moments of like success or like small little wins I make, of whether it's like, oh, I really managed my medication well that day, or I didn't get a headache after this thing I got a headache after before, those kind of things. So I'm trying to, I suppose, make this video to log all of the different things I'm dealing with, and maybe recognize by talking it out that I am doing my best, and that actually my life is very nuanced because of these different things I'm dealing with as well. So that's the hope for this, is that I will feel better after talking this out. I don't really know if that's how this will go, but we'll see. I suppose, you know, just to give you a little bit of background, you know, if you are new here, I'm 29 years old. I will be 30 in a month. But I was diagnosed as autistic and having ADHD 3 years ago. Obviously been autistic and had ADHD my whole life. And I've been chronically ill since I was 18, just after I turned 18. So it's been a long time, you know, it's been over a decade of that. But I suppose that my life, when I look back on it, childhood, teen years, all of those things are quite impacted by me feeling as if there's bits of myself I don't understand, because there is, you know, huge parts of my identity I didn't know about. And I coped with those things by trying to keep my life very, very neat, and my identities very neat. And I mean my identities in terms of who I was in the context of, you know, being with my immediate family, the Jen that was with my grandparents, the Jen that was a cousin, the Jen that was a fun friend, the Jen that was very academic and always hardworking, the Jen that's super organised. All of those things felt like segregated, siloed parts of me that I purposely did separate, because otherwise I think it felt like there was just too much to manage about me. For example, I knew early on that my identity of being like Jen, who's a really good friend in school and like really, really funny, was different to Jen when she would get home, because that Jen would be really, now I realise it, overwhelmed from the day as an autistic person. So I wouldn't be able to talk to my family for quite a while, or if I did, I could snap I could be quite snappy, and I wouldn't be able to modulate my tone or my face or anything. So I guess I always had that tug of war of, am I actually this person that I am in school, or am I in reality this vicious person that I am at home? And that makes me quite manipulative, because either way I'm pretending. And then when you throw health into it, when I first became chronically ill, and I started realising that, I suppose at 18 your friends are going out and things like that, they weren't exactly going to stick around if I was as verbal as I could have been about how much I was struggling. And that's not to condemn my friends, because they're still the same friends I have now. They're fantastic, but it's more to say that that's just a reality. So I learned very quickly to mask and to camouflage kind of a lot of pain and things, a lot of which the fatigue I was feeling. So once again, the Jen that I was at home was very different to the Jen that left the house, all of those kind of things. So I have worked consistently hard in my life to keep the different aspects of who I am very, very separate. I'm very neat and tidy, and because I am a neat and tidy person who's really organised, that has created such an inner tension in me that now at 30, you know, over a decade into this journey and a lifetime into being neurodivergent, I'm now starting to realise that I can't keep everything separate, which sounds potentially really obvious, and it is, I assure you it is, but I can't keep my identities separate. I need to be the Jen as much as possible. I just need to be Jen, because I'm so tired and I don't have the extra energy to give to being all of these different versions of myself. So, you know, I think in terms of that means being okay with my life being messy, which means being okay with doing my job as well as I can, but on any given day I might be less able to communicate to the degree I want to because of my neurodivergent identity, or I might have plans for lots of meetings on one day but actually wake up and my blood pressure is really low and I can't actually keep standing for that, or essentially being okay with the mess. And I'm not really good with mess. I'm not good at all with mess. This is something, once again, this is part of me acknowledging the mess, is me saying I'm not good with it. And I am working through all of this with a therapist. I'm actually starting with a new therapist next week, and I don't even know where we're going to start, because to me this is so chaotic. But I do think part of, if not all of the foundation of me not being okay with the mess and resisting that mess comes from becoming chronically ill so young, and losing my 20s to that, and keeping going through things like college and all of those things, pushing through, but never ever stopping to acknowledge how much that's changed me as a person and robbed me of things, and grieving. I've never stopped to grieve about what I couldn't do, because it was always a case of just keep going and a magical cure will come out of somewhere, or keep going, and if I just try hard enough, then someday I'll wake up and my joints won't dislocate all the time, or whatever it might be. So I think now I'm trying to learn how much my physical health and my neurodivergent identity, along with, you know, as a result my mental health, has impacted things that are integral to me, like my ambitions, my goals, my dreams, who I want to be in the world, how I want to navigate the world. So the way I've explained it, and this is something that I'm putting out on the internet, kind of maybe potentially hoping that other people who are struggling with similar things will also have had that inner tug of war. Well, I'm not hoping people will have struggled with that inner tug of war. I don't want anyone to have struggled in that sense, but that somebody else might have felt that way, and that I don't think any of us necessarily know the path forward and how to deal with it, but that we maybe can acknowledge it in each other and say, I recognise that's hard. I recognise you've kept going through this thing that's been horrendous. And for me, that's really, really important. So for me, I explained it recently to so I have a psychologist and a psychiatrist. I'm seeing a new psychologist next week. My psychiatrist, I was really worried about an appointment I had with her coming up. I really like her, but because I like her, I'm quite open with her, which means that I guess I can feel it can feel like letting air out of a tire, I think, when I go to her, but I hadn't seen her in like 6 months, and so much had happened in that time. But everything had changed, you know. I had moved to Dublin, I'd started a new job, I had an adrenal crisis, I had issues with friends, there was so much that I was really worried when I would get in there that I would, sometimes what I do is I can freeze and not know what to say, so then I just start masking, and trying to be like the best psychiatric patient possible, which is, you know, my best version of myself, which is smiling and saying, actually, everything isn't too bad, and I can lean back into this identity that I do fall into quite a bit, which is being an inspiration. That's not me saying I think I'm an inspiration to people. It's me saying that I can find it really comforting to, if I acknowledge the truth of how much pain I'm in and somebody says, God, you're great for keeping going, for me to like use that as validation to keep going and be like, okay, well, obviously sharing my story was powerful here and important here because somebody is now inspired, But actually in reality, I don't think my life should have to be inspiring to be worth sharing. I don't think anyone's should be. I don't think anyone has to be. Like, if you happen to be inspiring, that's great. But sometimes the days are just messy. So I was really conscious that when I would get into this appointment, I might potentially just freeze, and then fall back on showing her all the ways in which I've coped well, which, yeah, I do cope well. Like, I have coping mechanisms, but they're hard won and it's tiring, and it doesn't negate all the times I cry in the shower or can't move my legs when I'm in bed, or find myself wanting to die when I'm in work and I just really can't cope with a conversation that's happening because I find it triggering, but I'm still smiling because I really, really want to be friends with everyone I work with, all of those things. So what I did is I brought in this notebook and I made a drawing in it. I'm not a good artist at all. Well, I'm not an artist in any capacity. I was trying to make up the Venn diagrams of my life. And this is what I want to share and log, is that right now these are the Venn diagrams I'm dealing with. So I was trying to explain to her that every decision I make is impacted by these overlapping Venn diagrams, which Venn diagrams automatically overlap, so I probably don't need to qualify that, but anyway. So for example, every decision I make and every step I make is impacted by the circle that is neurodivergence, where autism and mental health, ADHD and all of that exist. But then there's that circle that's overlapping with it, which is chronic illness, which is my Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, hypermobility type, and my adrenal insufficiency, and kind of secondary to that, my POTS, like my postural orthostatic tachycardia. But then on top of all of that, I have quite a bit, and this is something I'm only starting to recognise, which feels appallingly obvious. I have quite a lot of trauma, medical trauma, from years of not being listened to, and then I have quite a bit of trauma from other things that have happened. And I think those past experiences and the fear I hold about those experiences do inform how I interact with the world now. So that can be really difficult. So I have these overlapping circles. And then, this is something I haven't really talked about on the internet a lot, and I don't know how much I'll go into it even now or in the future, but I think what has led me, she asked me, I presented her with this information, and she said to me, she was like, how have you coped? What has been your primary coping mechanism for the last 12 years of being chronically ill, or not knowing you're neurodivergent, managing all of those things? Because it's obvious that I'm a very organised, control-based person, and absolutely unsurprisingly, the answer is disordered eating. And this is something that's very sensitive for me to talk about. I'm really new to figuring this out. And I'm really new to getting treatment for it, to be honest. But I think my Venn diagrams of trying to manage all of these components has been, sorry, my hands are I don't know if this visual is helping, but neurodiversity, chronic illness plus trauma, the way to keep going and to achieve all the things I want to achieve, because in being sick, in being neurodivergent, all of those things, I never stopped being ambitious. And I've never stopped having dreams and goals, has been to control what I can control, which is my eating, which is restrictive behaviours. And then I think that's what ultimately has led me to actually pursue therapy this time. I've had therapy in the past, but pursue a specific kind of therapy this time is because of my adrenal insufficiency and being on steroids. I have gained weight, and it's not really in masses of weight really so much as it is water retention, but it means my face feels unrecognisable to me. If you look at my content over the last year and a half, my face fluctuates size a lot, which just happens when you're on steroids for life. It's going to continue to happen. But I didn't realise how utterly fragile my sense of self is in relation to being connected to my body. I think it was one thing, this sounds appalling, but I'm going to be honest, I think it was one thing for me when I was chronically ill and I couldn't control that, but at least I was thin. I've never said that out loud, but I think it's true. I think it's what I always thought was, if I was thin, then there was some validation for my body being my body. there was some way in which it was still cooperating with the world, and some way in which I was still aligning with what the world wanted of me. Whereas now, feeling as though I'm not in that thin body anymore, actually feeling like I can feel this water weight, like I can feel my chin, or I can feel my, whatever it is, like I can really feel, you can feel water retention from steroids in a really strange way. If you've experienced it, you know what I mean, probably, but like, you can actually feel like the tightness on your skin, and sometimes that's really necessary because you have to updose your medication like that. When I had a crisis, I had to be on a really high dose of steroids or else I would die for a long time afterwards, and then you taper down and all of those kind of things. But that has felt like, therefore, my body is doing nothing for the world to align itself with fitting in the world, so therefore it doesn't need to exist. And that's just being honest, and I think that's probably brutally honest, and probably more honest than I thought I would be. But so I guess I presented it to this therapist as having these Venn diagrams of autism, chronic illness, trauma, using the control mechanism of an eating disorder and restrictive behaviours that have amplified significantly since having my adrenal insufficiency diagnosis, which would have been in January 23. Yeah, January 23. After being really unwell for a long time, I found that really, like, I found that as a good way to explain it to her. She didn't immediately say anything. She actually was like, can I take this and take a scan of this to put it on your file? And because I'm such a little people pleaser, I was like, oh, go for it. Even though now I'm like, I don't know if I wanted that. But now I've realised, I think, and this is probably that these Venn diagrams and these overlapping circles are not static, that they change a lot of the time. And actually what I'm managing right now in terms of things is actually that I would say my chronic illness, my eating disorder, which, you know, categorically been diagnosed after so many years. Like, I should say I have had restrictive behaviours in relation to my food since 18, since I first became chronically sick, because I felt so out of control. I am now nearly 30, and that's the first time I'm sitting down with the therapist and saying, I actually think these two things could be connected, like my chronic illness starting and my eating disorder starting. I always knew those two things were connected, but I just never said it out loud. Those were separate ideas. They weren't things I needed to connect, you know, which doesn't make sense. But anyway, I suppose it's mental illness doesn't necessarily have to make sense for it to be valid. So what I've realised now is my eating disorder is overlapping with my chronic illness, which is overlapping with the trauma, but actually I'm viewing all of this through the lens of neurodivergence, and particularly through the lens of autism, because how I eat is influenced by my sensory behaviours. What I view as stressful in any given workday is totally dependent on my perspective of the world. It's very much why I find it hard when someone says that they have autism. Well, not if someone says they have autism, because if that's how someone chooses to identify and speak about autism, I think that's totally fine and valid. And I will fully respect that. It's more if someone refers to me as saying, oh, you have autism. It doesn't feel accurate or representative. I don't get annoyed by it, and I probably wouldn't really correct someone, but it does feel not accurate to my experience, because autism doesn't feel like something I carry around. It feels like my lens at which I look through life. And now I'm realising it's the lens at which I view my chronic illness. For example, in terms of the chronic illness thread of things, my autism is the reason I am able to be so consistent about logging my symptoms, about charting everything, keeping track of everything, logging details, like hence why I was so distraught that I had an adrenal crisis in the first place, because I was like, I'm so organised, I'm so on top of this, I pattern recognise how much steroids I need on any given day, I do all of these things right, I do the right thing. Autism impacts my eating disorder because what I eat is so dependent on like my sensory processing of food. I like repeated foods, I like foods to taste the same all the time. I find it really difficult in work when everyone is sitting in the canteen and I love my colleagues and they're all trying out new things, or they went to a new place for lunch. and I just can't participate in that conversation because I just don't, it feels entirely foreign, really, as a concept to me. And then I think my trauma is viewed entirely through an autistic lens because I have a sense that that I should probably be over it, or it's done and I should just manage it, or that it was my fault because of how I communicated or didn't communicate, or things like that. So I presented that kind of shifting Venn diagrams to my psychiatrist and said, I actually think autism is the lens through which I see all of these facets. And now I want to be able to bring these ideas together and say, well, actually, I'm not someone who has an eating disorder, and then someone who has a chronic illness, and then someone who has trauma. I'm actually Jen, who has all of these things going on at once, and that's actually significantly difficult to deal with, and it does impact my everyday decisions. You know, my therapist then asked, she was like, what kind of decisions does it impact? And I was hoping she wouldn't ask that, even though it was obviously going to come up. But, you know, like, even if you don't know, adrenal insufficiency, like, sometimes you need to updose your medication. Like, for example, if I was in a car and I nearly had a crash, you know, like there was a near miss, just that jolt of like adrenaline and things, and that shock, because my body doesn't produce the cortisol, you might need to updose just a little bit. It could be a little, it could be a lot, depending on what you need, of your steroids, just to cope with that shock. Without a doubt, something I will consider when I am updosing is, should I updose, is, will this make me extra bloated? Will this make me extra hungry and I'll gain weight? If I do updose and then my face changes shape, will I be able to cope with that? Will I be able to cope with not recognising myself? Will this make my legs feel like watery and heavy? And therefore I won't want to socialise, I won't want to see people because I won't want them to see me when I feel larger. I think now what I'm at is like acknowledging how complicated all of those things are, and that actually none of that's okay. It's not okay to be feeling like I need to contend with all of these bloody things, like coming from different directions of eating disorder considerations, chronic illness considerations, autism considerations, all of these things, plus, you know, trying to keep a job and do a PhD and like all of the things I love doing and love in my life. I think I know I want to be able to say this is messy and it's kind of ugly, and I do want to be able to say these are genuine thoughts I have and they're not good, but I don't have replacements for them right now. I don't actually have a coping mechanism for them. So I'm not an inspiration. I'm not someone to follow on this, but I am trying, and I'm going to work with my team to figure it out. But I am struggling with these different aspects, and even I think how I make content can be very much siloed to an experience of like one of those, which is just kind of natural because otherwise it can be a lot to address. But I think I just want to acknowledge the mess that this is what I'm dealing with at the moment. Is, yeah, it is July. It's July 2024. In a month I'm going to be 30. Future Jen, if you look back on this and you think, wow, I really did the work and got it together and all of those things, that's great. Maybe in a year's time I'll feel worse, maybe I'll feel better, but regardless I'm going to feel messy, because I think that's life. And I think the more I say that, the more I can come to accept it. So starting next week, I'm meeting with the dietetics team and a new psychologist to do specifically with like questioning, I guess, working through some of these things that I never let myself grieve for, which is when I, first became sick, and I've lost countless experiences. I've lost a decade, and this isn't something that's going to stop into my 30s. This is going to be my life. And I think it's time to face all of that, and it's going to be so hard, and I'm going to be so tired, and I don't know if I can do it. And I really, even just talking about it now, I actually feel really overwhelmed. So I just need to take a minute. But I think what I wanted this video to be is a time capsule to acknowledge this is where I'm at right now, and I am doing enough, because this is what doing my best means, because my best is what I can give on any day, and this is what I can give today, and this is what I can give consistently. Is I don't know how to fix the mess. My best isn't having a spotless life. My best is being able to acknowledge that there's chaos. And that's as far as I can get right now. And I don't think that's a bad thing. But if you have had something similar, or maybe you are having a similar experience, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. I not in so much because I hope you have, but because it makes me feel like, it makes me feel less inclined to compare my life to other people's and say, well, my life is so messy, but theirs isn't, so therefore the fault is mine. Instead, I can say, well, actually, living in this planet, on this time, being human in this existence, in this space, is actually just acutely messy, and that's just the standard. And I think I find that comforting. So thank you for watching, for whatever this ramble was. I don't even know what I'm gonna call this, and for being patient with me as I ramble and explain my various Venn diagrams and all of that. And I'll see you guys soon. Thanks, guys. Bye.